Night fell heavily on Interstate 40, tinging the asphalt with orange and purple hues as the sun disappeared on the New Mexico horizon. Jack Morrison had been driving his Peterbilt for almost 8 hours straight, his eyes tired but alert, his mind wandering between the road ahead and the memories that insisted on returning. It had been 2 years since Sarah had left, taken by an aggressive cancer that not even all modern medicine had been able to stop. 2 years since the house in Amarillo had become too quiet, too empty, making Jack prefer to spend more and more time on the road, where the roar of the engine and the whisper of the tires on the asphalt filled the void that no conversation could fill anymore. He adjusted the faded Tool brand cap he'd worn for years and took another sip of the now cold coffee resting in the cup holder. It was almost 8 o'clock at night, and he intended to drive to Albuquerque, where a shipment of automotive parts awaited him the following morning. The road was relatively empty in that stretch, with only a few sporadic cars overtaking his truck or being overtaken by it. Jack knew that route like the back of his hand, having driven it hundreds of times in the last 15 years of his career. The radio played softly an old country song that Sarah used to sing while cooking on Sundays. Jack felt that familiar pang in his chest, that dull pain that never really went away, only became more bearable with time. He had tried therapy soon after she left, sitting uncomfortably in that lavender-scented office while a kind, middle-aged woman tried to get him to talk about his feelings. But Jack wasn't much of a talker. He never had been. Sarah always said he spoke more with silence than with words, and maybe she was right. That's when he saw something strange ahead. Brake lights flashing abruptly, a vehicle stopped on the shoulder with its doors open. Jack instinctively began to slow down, his experience on the road setting off an internal alarm. Something was wrong with that scene. As he got closer, his blood ran cold. A large, muscular man was dragging a woman by her hair from the shoulder toward a black SUV. She struggled, kicking the air, trying to cling to the ground, but he was much stronger and pulled her with brutal violence. Her screams cut through the night like shards of glass. Jack didn't think twice. He slammed on the brakes, turned on the emergency lights, and pulled the truck over to the side of the road a few meters ahead of the scene. His 62 years and the weariness of decades on the road didn't matter at that moment. He jumped from the cab with an agility he hadn't felt in years, his heart pounding in his chest. The man looked at Jack with an expression that mixed surprise and anger. "It's none of your business, old man," the aggressor shouted without letting go of the woman's hair. "She's my wife. We're just having a marital argument." "Ex-wife," the woman managed to scream between sobs, her face contorted with pain. She had a black eye, and blood trickled from her split lip. "He won't accept the divorce. Please help me. Please." Jack moved closer, keeping his hands visible but firmly at his sides. He had served in the Marine Corps as a young man, 2 tours in Iraq during the First Gulf War, and although those days were long gone, the training had never completely left him. He knew danger when he saw it, and this man was dangerous. His tense muscles, the way he stood, his wild eyes, everything indicated someone on the edge of control. "Let her go now," Jack said in a calm but authoritative voice. "It doesn't have to be this way. You can leave, she can leave, and nobody needs to get hurt more than they already are." The man, whom Jack estimated to be about 35 years old, let out a bitter, uncontrolled laugh. "Or what, Grandpa? Are you going to stop me?" He had tattoos covering his arms and neck, including one that read, "Death Before Dishonor," in Gothic script. His eyes were bloodshot, possibly from alcohol or drugs, and there was a vomit stain on his shirt. "Get out of here before I send you to the hospital. Or better yet, to the cemetery along with your old lady." Jack felt anger burning in his stomach, but he kept his voice steady. "Last chance. Let the girl go and each of you go your own way. It doesn't have to end worse than it already is." "You don't understand," the man began, laughing hysterically, still holding Emily by the hair. "She's mine. Mine. We have a daughter together. She can't just leave me like I'm trash, like everything we've built meant nothing. You forfeited all right to have anything to do with me when you broke my arm, Emily screamed back, tears mingling with the blood on her face. When you put our daughter in danger, when you made me afraid to sleep in my own home. What happened next was swift. The man, driven by blind rage, violently shoved Emily against the hood of the SUV with such force that she hit her head and fell to the ground, stunned. Then he lunged at Jack with clenched fists, letting out a primal roar of anger. But Jack was prepared. He'd spent the last 2 years on the road, but before that, during his years with Sarah, he'd regularly gone to the gym, kept himself in shape, and military training never really leaves a man. He dodged the first punch with a sideways movement, grabbed the attacker's arm, and used the man's own momentum against him, applying an arm lock that made him double over in pain. The man tried to resist, tried to break free, but Jack applied more pressure, forcing him to his knees on the ground. The attacker shouted obscenities, spat, tried to headbutt backward, but Jack was more experienced, more controlled. "You haven't learned anything, have you?" Jack said, maintaining just enough pressure to immobilize him without causing permanent damage. He looked at the woman, who had fallen to the ground and was now staring at him with wide eyes, a mixture of terror and hope. There was blood on her forehead where she had hit the hood. "Miss, are you all right? Can you get my cell phone from the truck and call 911? It's on the dashboard, unlocked." The woman stood up, staggering, her legs trembling so violently she almost fell again. She was about 25 years old, with disheveled brown hair and a bruise already forming on her face, in addition to the black eye that was already there. Her clothes were torn at the shoulder, and there were deep scratches on her arms, as if she had tried to grab onto something while being dragged. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice broken and hoarse. "Thank you. Thank you." She ran to Jack's truck, stumbling once but keeping her balance, grabbed the cell phone he indicated was on the dashboard, and made the call with trembling fingers. "You'll regret this, you useless old man," growled the still immobilized man, spit dripping from his mouth. "You don't know who I am. I have lawyers. I have connections. I'll sue you for assault. I'll destroy your life like you're trying to destroy mine." "You can sue all you want," Jack replied calmly, without loosening his grip. "But there are about 10 traffic cameras on this road that will show exactly what you were doing to her. Plus the 2 cameras on my truck, one in the front and one in the back, which recorded everything from the moment I stopped. It shows you dragging her, hitting her, trying to attack me. So you can bring your sophisticated lawyers. I have the truth recorded in high definition." The man was silent for a moment, the weight of this reality sinking into his drunken mind. Then he began to cry, heavy sobs shaking his entire body. "I love her," he groaned. "I just wanted us to be a family again. Lily needs her father. Why doesn't she understand that?" "Love doesn't hurt," Jack said, his voice softer now but still firm. "Love doesn't drag. Love doesn't hit. What you did has nothing to do with love, boy. It has to do with control, with anger, with selfishness, and you're going to have to answer for it." Emily returned from the truck, still holding the phone to her ear, speaking rapidly to the 911 dispatcher. "Yes, Interstate 40, about 20 miles west of Albuquerque. There's a truck driver here who saved my life. My ex-husband tried to kidnap me. He hit me. He... Her voice faltered, and she began to cry again, but she managed to give the necessary location information. Jack could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. Help was on the way. He held the man down, not out of malice, but out of necessity. He couldn't risk him trying to attack Emily again or escape. The minutes seemed to drag on forever, punctuated only by the sobs of the attacker and Emily, the distant sound of traffic passing on the main road, and the steady beating of Jack's heart in his own chest. 15 minutes later, 2 state police cars arrived at the scene, their blue and red lights painting the night in flashing colors that made everything seem surreal, like a scene from a movie. The officers quickly got out of the vehicles, hands on their weapons, assessing the situation. One of them, a younger man who looked like he had recently come from the gym, approached cautiously. "Sir, I need you to release him slowly," said the police officer, keeping his voice calm but authoritative. Jack obeyed, gradually releasing the pressure on the assailant's arm and taking a few steps back with his hands visible. The man was immediately surrounded by police officers who made him lie face down on the ground before handcuffing him. He didn't resist. All his previous struggle had vanished, leaving only a broken man crying on the cold asphalt. The second officer, a veteran with grey hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes, approached Jack. The name tag on his uniform read Sergeant Williams. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Williams. Can you tell me what happened here?" Jack recounted everything, from the moment he saw Emily being dragged away to the physical confrontation. His voice was firm, factual, without unnecessary emotion. He was used to dealing with authorities. He had done it many times over the years in road accident situations or cargo inspections. Sergeant Williams took notes in a small notebook, nodding occasionally as he wrote. Emily gave her testimony to the younger police officer, who had introduced himself as Officer Martinez. Between tears and pauses to breathe, she explained how her ex-husband, Derek Patterson, had followed her for days, showing up at her work, her apartment, and their daughter's school. How she had obtained a restraining order 3 weeks prior, but Derek had completely ignored it. How that night he had waited for her in the parking lot of the supermarket where she worked as a cashier, forced her into his car under threat of hurting their daughter, and driven her to that deserted road with intentions she didn't even want to imagine. He said that if he couldn't have a family with me, then nobody could have anything, Emily said, her voice cold with shock. He had a gun in the car. I saw it when he opened the glove compartment. I know he was going to kill me. And then that truck stopped, and that man, Mr. Morrison, he saved my life. An ambulance arrived soon after, and the paramedics began examining Emily. They cleaned the cut on her forehead, checked for concussion, and examined the bruises and scratches. Jack watched from a distance, refusing medical treatment for himself, despite the paramedics' insistence. He was fine, just a few minor bruises from when he held Derek. Sergeant Williams returned to Jack after speaking with his team and reviewing the truck's cameras. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to know that you saved this young woman's life today. Derek Patterson has an extensive record. 3 prior charges of domestic violence, 1 of illegal possession of a firearm, 2 of drunk driving. He was on probation, and we found a .45 caliber pistol in the glove compartment of his SUV, loaded with a bullet in the chamber." The sergeant paused meaningfully. "If you hadn't stopped—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implications hung in the air like thick smoke. Jack simply nodded, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He had saved a life, truly saved, not just helped or assisted. If he had kept driving, if he had decided it wasn't his problem, Emily Patterson would be dead now. Derek was led to the police car, still crying, still murmuring about love and family and how none of it was fair. Jack watched him go, feeling a mixture of anger and strangely pity. That man had destroyed his own life, destroyed his family, and couldn't even see that it was his fault. He was so caught up in his own victim narrative that he couldn't see the monster he had become. Emily was taken to the ambulance for transport to the hospital for further evaluation, but before going in, she gently freed herself from the paramedics and ran to Jack. Without saying a word, she hugged him tightly, her thin arms squeezing him as if he were a lifeline in the middle of a stormy ocean. She cried against his chest, and Jack, uncomfortable with the display of gratitude but touched by her, simply patted her gently on the back as he would a frightened daughter. "You saved my life," she said, the words muffled against her shirt. "I have a 3-year-old daughter, Lily. She would have grown up without a mother. if it weren't for you. How can I thank you? How can I ever thank you enough?" Jack, his throat tight with emotion, simply said, "You don't need to thank me. Just take care of yourself and stay safe. Take care of that girl." He pulled a crumpled business card from his pocket, one of those that transportation companies issue with the driver's name and contact information. "If you need testimony in court or anything, just call me. Anytime, any day." She took the card as if it were the most precious thing in the world, clutching it to her chest before finally letting the paramedics take her away. Jack watched until the ambulance disappeared into the night, its red lights flashing fainter and fainter until they vanished completely. Sergeant Williams returned once more, this time with a small smile on his tired face. "Mr. Morrison, I'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to sign your formal statement. But for now, you're free to go." "Are you sure you're okay to drive? You can have a room at a nearby motel on us if you need to rest." "I'm fine," Jack replied, though he wasn't sure if it was true. His hands were starting to tremble now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "I'll just drive to the next rest stop and stop for a few hours." "That seems sensible. And Mr. Morrison?" The sergeant extended his hand. "Thank you. Not for doing my job for me, but for being the kind of person who stops when others would move on. The world needs more people like you." Jack shook his hand, nodded to Officer Martinez, and returned to his truck. Once in the cab, he just sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the empty road ahead. His whole body began to tremble, the physical reaction delayed by the physical confrontation and the shock of what could have happened. He could have been stabbed, shot, beaten. Derek was younger, stronger. If things had gone differently. But they didn't run, and a woman was alive because of that. A 3-year-old girl would still have her mother. That had to mean something. Jack started the engine, waited for the trembling in his hands to subside enough to drive safely, and got back on the road. He drove to the nearest rest stop, parked in a dark corner away from the other vehicles, leaned back in his seat and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face. He saw Derek dragging her. He saw the gun in the glove compartment that could easily have been used against any of them. And he saw Sarah. Sarah, with her gentle smile, her kind eyes. The way she always knew when he was upset, even when he tried to hide it. Sarah, who spent her last months comforting others at the cancer treatment center, even as she herself was dying. Sarah, who would have been so proud of what he did that night. "I tried, darling," he whispered to the empty darkness of the cabin. "I tried to do something that mattered." He finally fell asleep as the sun began to rise, a restless sleep filled with confused dreams and mixed memories. When he woke up a few hours later, stiff and sore, he checked his phone and found 3 text messages from an unknown number. The first message read, "Mr. Morrison, this is Emily. The hospital discharged me. I'm with my daughter now, safe. I will never forget what you did." The second, "The detective told me that Derek will face multiple serious charges: kidnapping, violation of a restraining order, illegal possession of a weapon, attempted murder. He won't hurt me again." The third, sent just 20 minutes ago. "I know you're probably busy with your deliveries, but if you ever pass through Albuquerque again, I'd really like to thank you properly. You and your favorite coffee are on me. Forever." Jack felt something loosen in his chest as he read the messages. He typed a simple reply, "I'm glad you and your daughter are safe. Take care." So he started the truck, checked his mirrors, and got back on the road. He still had a delivery to make in Albuquerque, and then another in Phoenix, and then the long drive back to Amarillo. Life went on, the road went on, and Jack Morrison kept driving. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted within him that night on Interstate 40. For the first time since Sarah left, he felt he had a purpose beyond simply existing, beyond merely filling the days until it was his turn to leave as well. He had made a difference. A real, tangible, life-saving difference. The following weeks were strange. Jack tried to return to his normal delivery routine, but found himself constantly thinking about Emily and her daughter, wondering if they were okay, if Derek was really behind bars, if the restraining order was being respected now. He resisted the urge to call or text. He didn't want to seem intrusive or inappropriate. He was just an old trucker who had done the right thing, nothing more. But Emily hadn't forgotten. She sent occasional messages, just small updates. Derek had been denied bail due to his history and the seriousness of the charges. The preliminary hearing had been scheduled. Lily was asking questions about why Daddy wasn't around, and Emily was in therapy trying to figure out how to explain to a 3-year-old that her father was dangerous. It was 3 weeks after the incident that Emily called. Jack was in Tucson, unloading air conditioning parts at a warehouse under the scorching Arizona sun when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He was sweaty and tired and not in the mood to talk. But something made him pick up. "Mr. Morrison, it's Emily. I hope I'm not bothering you." "Of course not," Jack replied, surprised at how happy he was to hear her voice. "How are you?" "Much better, thanks to you. Derek was indicted by a grand jury. First-degree kidnapping, attempted murder, violation of a restraining order, illegal possession by a convicted person, and a few other charges. The prosecutor said he'll get at least 15 years, possibly 20 or more if the jury decides it was premeditated." His voice was firmer now, stronger than that night on the road. "But that's not why I called." "No?" "No. I was thinking a lot about that night, about how things could have ended differently, and I realized that I want to get to know you better, not just as the man who saved my life, but as a person. I'd like to know if you'd be free for coffee when you're in Albuquerque again. Just to chat, no pressure. I'd like to thank you in person truly this time, not just amidst the chaos of that night." Jack hesitated. There was something in her voice, a sincerity, a genuine warmth that touched him in a way he hadn't expected, and he realized he wanted that too. He wanted to know how she was, to learn more about this courageous woman who had survived so much. "I'll be around next Tuesday," he finally said. "Around noon, is that okay?" "Perfect. I'll send you the address of the cafe." "Way." When Tuesday arrived, Jack found himself nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. He'd even stopped by a barbershop in Amarillo before hitting the road, trimming his beard and hair, which had grown wild during his weeks of neglect. He took off his favorite flannel shirt, the one Sarah always said made his blue eyes look brighter, and even ironed it, something he hadn't done in months. He felt ridiculous, a 62-year-old man acting like a teenager going on a first date. But it wasn't a date, he repeated to himself as he drove toward Albuquerque. It was just a thank-you coffee. It was just 2 people sharing a cup of coffee and chatting, nothing more. Even so, his hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and he checked his reflection in the rearview mirror more times than he wanted to admit. The cafe was located in a quiet Albuquerque neighborhood, far from the main highways and the constant noise of traffic. It was a cozy place called The Daily Grind, with exposed brick walls painted a soft yellow, plants hanging from the windows, and the comforting smell of freshly ground coffee beans permeating the air. There was local art on the walls, paintings of New Mexico landscapes and abstract portraits in vibrant colors. Soft music played in the background, something instrumental that Jack couldn't identify but found relaxing. Emily was already there when he arrived, seated at a corner table near a large window overlooking the street. She was reading a book, her reading glasses resting on the tip of her nose, completely absorbed. Jack paused for a moment in the doorway, just observing. She looked so different from the last time he'd seen her. The bruise had completely disappeared, the cut on her forehead healed in a thin, barely visible line. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she was wearing a simple blue blouse and jeans. There was a glint in her eyes when she looked up and saw him, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "Mr. Morrison," she stood up quickly, almost dropping her coffee cup in the process. "You came. Please call me Jack," he said as he approached the table. "Mr. Morrison makes me feel older than I already am." "So, Jack," she smiled, "thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. What would you like to drink? It's on me, I insist." They spent the next few minutes deciding what to order, Emily insisting he try the house special, a cappuccino with cinnamon and honey that she swore was the best in town. Jack relented, and when the drink arrived, he had to admit it was exceptional. They initially chatted about trivial things, trying to find a comfortable rhythm, the weather, the traffic, the quality of the coffee. But gradually, the conversation deepened. Emily talked about her life, about how she had married Derek when she was only 19, young and naive, and in love with the idea of love more than with the man himself. He was charming at first, she explained, stirring her cup. Attentive, protective. But there were signs, you know? Signs that I ignored because I wanted it to work so badly. The way he got annoyed when I went out with my friends, how he checked my phone, how he made sure to know where I was every minute of the day. "You couldn't have known," Jack said gently. "Those guys are experts at hiding who they really are until it's too late." "Yes," she agreed sadly. "And then I got pregnant with Lily, and I thought things would get better. I thought being a father would change him. But it got worse. He became more possessive, more controlling. He started drinking more, and then came the pushing, the yelling, and eventually—" She unconsciously touched the area where the bruise had been. Jack felt the familiar anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "And you found the courage to leave." "It took time," Emily admitted. "Too much time. But I finally realized it wasn't just about me. It was about Lily, too. She was starting to be afraid of him, starting to shrink away when he came into the room, and I couldn't let my daughter grow up thinking that was normal, that love meant fear." "It took a lot of strength," Jack said, and he truly believed it. "Getting out is the most dangerous part. Statistics show that's when the violence usually escalates." "I know," she said calmly. "And it would have escalated all the way that night if you hadn't stopped. The detective showed me the messages they found on Derek's phone. He had planned everything, to take me to the desert, kill me, make it look like I had disappeared voluntarily. He even dug. He had—" Her voice faltered, and she wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. Jack reached across the table and gently covered her hand. "But that didn't happen. You're here. You're safe, and he'll pay for what he did." Emily looked at his hand covering hers, then at his face. "You've been so kind to me. We barely know each other, but you risked your life." "Why?" Jack pulled his hand away, suddenly aware of the contact. He looked out the window, watching the people passing by on the sidewalk, organizing his thoughts. "My wife, Sarah, she died 2 years ago." He began slowly. "Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to death it was only 6 months. And during all that time I did everything I could. I took her to every doctor, every experimental treatment. I held her hand during chemotherapy. I cleaned up when she vomited. I told her every day that I loved her. But in the end, it made no difference. She died anyway, and I couldn't do anything to stop it." He paused, emotion thick in his throat. Emily waited in respectful silence, giving him the time he needed. "So, when I saw you being dragged down that road," Jack continued, his voice stronger now, "I saw a situation where I really could make a difference, where my actions could change the outcome. I couldn't save Sarah, but I could save you. It wasn't anything noble or heroic. It was just a man trying to make sense of things again, trying to feel that his existence had a purpose." "That was noble," Emily said firmly. "And it was heroic. You owe me nothing, you didn't know me, but you chose to act when most people would have simply called 911 and kept driving. You put yourself in danger for a complete stranger. If that's not heroism, I don't know what is." Jack finally looked at her again, seeing the utter sincerity in her eyes. "So I guess we both made difficult choices that day. You chose to fight. You chose to survive. I chose to stop. And somehow our choices intersected at that exact moment." They continued talking, the hours passing without them noticing. Emily spoke about Lily, about how her daughter was funny and intelligent and completely fascinated by dinosaurs. She showed photos on her phone, a beautiful little girl with brown curls and a toothless smile. Jack, in turn, found himself sharing memories of Sarah that he hadn't shared with anyone for months. How she insisted on dancing in the kitchen while cooking, even if there was no music playing. How she collected interesting stones from every place they visited. How she laughed so loudly and freely that she always made other people around her smile too. 40 years of marriage, Jack said, his voice full of admiration and loss. And it still wasn't enough time. I would have given anything for another year, another month, another day. She must have been an incredible woman to inspire so much love, Emily observed kindly. She was, Jack agreed. She was the kind of person who lit up any room she entered, always thinking of others, always finding ways to help. She would have been so proud of what you're doing, rebuilding your life, protecting your daughter. She always admired courage. When they finally looked at the clock, Jack realized with shock that they had been there for more than 3 hours. The cafe was beginning to fill with the late afternoon bustle, university students with laptops and couples meeting after work. He still had a delivery to make, but somehow he couldn't bring himself to get up and leave. "I don't want to take up all your time," Emily said, but her voice suggested she was also reluctant to end the conversation. "But I really enjoyed it. I really did. It's good to talk to someone who understands, someone who doesn't treat me like a broken victim or a charity project." "You're neither of those things," Jack said firmly. "You're a survivor. There's a big difference." Emily smiled that bright smile again. "Would you like to do this again, the next time you're around here?" Jack didn't hesitate this time. "I'd really like that." That cafe turned into another, and then another. Whenever Jack passed through Albuquerque, they would run into each other. Sometimes at the same cafe, sometimes at a different restaurant Emily wanted to try, once at a park where Emily took Lily to play, and Jack found himself pushing a giggling little girl on a swing, his heart aching with memories of when he and Sarah had talked about having children, conversations that never materialized due to medical complications. Emily was rebuilding her life piece by piece. She had gone back to school, enrolling in a nursing technician program at the local community college. "I want to help people," she explained during one of her meetings, "just like you helped me. I want to be someone who makes a difference when people are at their lowest points." Jack encouraged her every step of the way. He listened when she needed to vent about the challenges of balancing school, work, and raising Lily alone. He offered practical advice when she asked, having accumulated decades of wisdom on simply carrying on when life got tough. But most importantly, he was simply there, a steady and reliable presence in a life that had been marked by so much chaos and unpredictability. It wasn't romance. They both understood that instinctively. Jack still wore his wedding ring, still spoke of Sarah in the present tense sometimes, forgetting for a moment that she was gone. And Emily was processing deep trauma, not ready for anything more than friendship. But it was precious nonetheless. It was genuine human connection, two wounded souls finding comfort and understanding in each other's company. It was 6 months after that night on Interstate 40, during one of their regular coffee dates, that Emily made a proposal that would change everything. They were sitting in the same cafe where they had first met, the place that had become their cafe, without either of them ever saying so. "Jack, I've been thinking a lot about something, and I need to discuss it with you," Emily began, her hands cupping the teacup as if seeking warmth, even though it was a hot September day. "Go ahead. You know you can tell me anything." "That night changed my life in more ways than you can imagine," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "And then, when I started going to the support group for survivors of domestic violence, I talked to so many other women. Women with stories like mine, or worse. Women who weren't lucky enough to have a Jack Morrison driving down Interstate 40 at the right time." Jack began to understand where this was going, but he let her continue. "1 in 4 women will experience severe domestic violence in their lives," Emily continued, the passion rising in her voice. "That's millions of women, Jack. Millions. And many of them have nowhere to go. Shelters are always overcrowded. Families sometimes don't believe them or can't help. They get trapped in dangerous situations because they have no options." "It's a tragedy," Jack agreed. "But what are you thinking?" "I want to open a shelter," Emily said, the words tumbling out. "A safe place for women and children fleeing abusive relationships, a place where they can stay while they re-establish themselves, where they can access counseling, legal assistance, and job training. A place that offers not only immediate safety, but helps build a path to a better future." Jack leaned back in his chair, processing it. It was an ambitious idea, perhaps even impossible. But as he looked at Emily's face, seeing the determination there, the passion, the sense of purpose, he felt something ignite within him as well. "This is going to require a lot of money," he said cautiously. "We're talking about at least a large enough house, 24-hour security, staff, legal resources, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions." "I know," Emily said quickly, "and I've spent the last few months researching exactly that. I've spoken with non-profits that do similar work. I've learned about state and federal grants available for domestic violence programs. I've found a national shelter organization that offers support and training for new projects." She pulled a folder from her bag, opening it on the table between them. It was full of documents, printed proposals, financial spreadsheets, and letters from organizations expressing interest in supporting the project. "I already have 3 potential donors who have expressed serious intentions to contribute if I can put together a solid business plan," she continued. "One is a local businessman whose sister was killed by her abusive partner. Another is a foundation that focuses on issues of violence against women. And the third is a church that has resources dedicated to community service programs." Jack flipped through the documents, impressed by the amount of work she had put into it. There was market research showing the desperate need for more shelter beds in Albuquerque. There were architectural plans to convert an existing property. There were detailed budgets and financial projections. "You really thought of everything," he said, admiration clear in his voice. "I tried. But there's one thing missing." Emily looked at him intently. "I need someone with life experience, someone who understands what's at stake, someone who can serve on the board, help guide the project, lend credibility through their presence and wisdom. I need you, Jack." Jack was silent for a long moment. He had spent so much time just existing, running routes, making deliveries, returning to an empty house. And now there was an opportunity to truly matter, to make a real difference, to create something that would last far beyond him. "I don't know how much I can help," he said slowly. "I'm just a truck driver. I don't have any formal education in non-profit management or social work." "You have something better," Emily retorted. "You have integrity, you have compassion, you have the courage to act when it matters, and you understand in a deep and personal way the value of saving a life. That's worth more than any diploma." Jack looked at the documents again, at Emily's hopeful face, and then at his own reflection in the cafe window. He saw an older man, yes, but he also saw something more. He saw possibility. He saw purpose. "I'm in," he finally said. "I don't know exactly how I can help, but I'm in. Let's make this happen." Emily's smile could have lit up the whole city. The following months were a whirlwind of activity, the likes of which Jack hadn't experienced in years. He began adjusting his delivery routes to spend more time in Albuquerque, working with Emily and a growing team of volunteers and professionals. He used his decades of connections in the trucking industry, reaching out to unions, trucking companies, and individual drivers to solicit support. The response was overwhelming. Truckers are a close-knit community, and when the story of Jack stopping to save Emily spread, many wanted to help. Some donated money. Others offered to transport furniture and supplies for free. A group of veteran drivers organized a charity convoy, a procession of 50 trucks that traveled from Amarillo to Albuquerque, raising funds along the way. Jack also reached out to his fellow veterans, the local American Legion, the VFW, Marine Corps veterans groups. He discovered that there were many men like him, men who had served their country, who understood about protecting the vulnerable, who wanted to make a difference in their communities. They organized fundraising events, donated time and resources, offered to install security systems and make necessary repairs to the building that Emily had identified. The property they found was perfect, a 3-story Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood, which had previously been a retirement home before being closed. It had 12 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a large commercial kitchen, and a spacious basement that could be converted into a recreation and counseling area. The property had been for sale for months, and when the owners learned about the proposed project, they offered a significant discount on the price. With the funds they had raised and a favorable mortgage from a local bank sympathetic to the cause, they were able to buy it. Jack found himself spending less and less time on the road and more time in Albuquerque. He was at the construction site every day, using the skills he had learned throughout his life. He helped install drywall, paint walls, and fix plumbing. He oversaw the installation of the sophisticated security system, working with companies that donated state-of-the-art equipment, including cameras, alarms, and a direct line of communication to the local police. During this time, Jack also met other survivors through Emily's support group, women of all ages, all backgrounds, all with stories of abuse and survival. Each story broke his heart, but also reinforced the importance of what they were building. There was Maria, a 40-year-old immigrant whose husband threatened her with deportation if she left him. There was Jennifer, a successful 35-year-old lawyer whose doctor husband used his position and connections to make her seem unstable. There was Rachel, just 18 years old, fleeing a high school boyfriend who had become violent and obsessive. Each of them needed help, safety, a place to start over, and Jack was determined to give them that. It was during the renovations that Jack realized something surprising about himself. He was no longer thinking about Sarah every moment of the day. The pain was still there, the loss still hurt, but it had been softened by something new, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, purpose. The feeling that he was building something that mattered, something that would last. One night, working late to finish installing shelves in one of the rooms, Emily came in with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him and sat down on the dusty floor, leaning against the wall. "You know you don't need to do all this," she said softly. "You've already done so much. You've raised funds, recruited volunteers, worked here practically every day. No one would expect more from you." "I want to do it," Jack replied, not stopping work. "Besides, it keeps me busy. The house in Amarillo is too quiet anyway." "Have you ever thought about moving here?" Emily asked casually, but there was something more in her voice. "I mean, you're here half the time anyway, and we could really use you on the board of directors once the shelter opens. It would be easier if you were around." Jack stopped working and looked at her. The idea hadn't really occurred to him before, but now that she mentioned it, it made perfect sense. What kept him in Amarillo besides memories? Sarah was gone. The house was empty. Her few friends there had gradually drifted away after her death, uncomfortable with her grief or simply preoccupied with their own lives. "I'll think about it," he finally said. And he thought. During the following days, while continuing to work at the shelter, Jack reflected on what he really wanted. He could continue being a trucker until retirement, spend most of his life on the road, occasionally returning to a house that was no longer a home. Or he could make a change, start a new chapter, dedicate himself completely to something that truly mattered. The decision, when it finally came, was surprisingly easy. He would sell the house in Amarillo and move to Albuquerque. He would retire from his job as a truck driver, something he was considering anyway given his age, and dedicate himself full-time to the shelter. He could live on his retirement income and savings, plus perhaps a part-time job if needed. When he told Emily about his decision, she hugged him so tightly that he almost lost his balance. "Are you sure?" she asked, stepping back to look into his eyes. "It's a big change." "I'm right," he said, and it was true. For the first time in 2 years, he was absolutely right about something. It's time for a new beginning. The transition was easier than Jack had expected. The house in Amarillo sold quickly to a young couple with their first child on the way. Jack felt a pang seeing another family move into the place where he and Sarah had built their life, but he also felt something akin to peace. The house would have life again, children's laughter, love. Sarah would have liked that. He found a small apartment in Albuquerque, a few blocks from the shelter. It was modest, just one room, but it had everything he needed. He brought some pieces of furniture that had sentimental value, some photos, Sarah's belongings that he couldn't part with. The rest he donated or sold. The shelter, which they decided to name Sarah's house in honor of Jack's late wife, was nearly finished. Emily had insisted on the name, saying that Sarah had clearly been someone who cared about others, and that it would be fitting to honor her in this way. Jack had been too emotional to argue. The inauguration was scheduled for a cold March morning. Local officials, the press, donors, and survivors from support groups were invited. Jack was nervous in a way he hadn't been since his days in the Marine Corps. He wasn't good with crowds or public attention, but Emily assured him that he wouldn't have to speak if he didn't want to. The morning of the event dawned clear and bright. The New Mexico sky, that impossible blue that seemed to exist only in the southwest. The Victorian house, now painted a soft yellow and cream, looked welcoming and inviting. A banner stretched over the front door. Sarah's House, Domestic Violence Resource Center, grand opening. People began arriving at 10 in the morning. Jack stood in the front yard, wearing the only suit he owned, the one he had worn to Sarah's funeral, nervously watching the growing crowd. There were reporters from 3 local TV stations, journalists from 2 newspapers, and dozens of supporters and onlookers. Emily, who had become surprisingly good at dealing with the media, welcomed everyone and began a tour of the facility. She showed the private rooms where the women and children could stay, each decorated in a warm and welcoming way. She showed the counseling room, the children's play area filled with donated toys, the kitchen where cooking and nutrition classes would be offered. She explained the services they would provide: access to lawyers specializing in restraining orders and divorces, therapists trained in trauma, vocational training programs, and assistance with permanent housing. "This place isn't just about providing temporary shelter," Emily explained to the cameras. "It's about giving women and children the tools they need to completely rebuild their lives. It's about breaking the cycle of abuse. It's about creating futures where domestic violence is something they survived, not something that defines who they are." When it came time to cut the ceremonial ribbon at the front door, Emily insisted that Jack stand beside her. He tried to refuse, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. "You are one of the reasons this exists," she said firmly. "You need to be here." So there he was, a 63-year-old truck driver next to a 26-year-old survivor, holding a huge ceremonial pair of scissors while photographers snapped pictures. The moment the ribbon was cut and the door swung open, revealing the beautiful and welcoming interior that so much work had gone into creating, Jack felt tears welling up in his eyes. Sarah would have loved that. She would have been the first to volunteer, the first to offer help, the first to embrace every woman who came in seeking safety. And although she wasn't there physically, Jack could somehow feel her presence, her approval, her pride. The media coverage was extensive and positive. The story of Jack saving Emily that night on Interstate 40, followed by his dedication to helping build the shelter, resonated with people. Donations began pouring in, some $5, others thousands. Volunteers offered to help with everything from cleaning to legal advice to childcare. Most importantly, women began to arrive. Not immediately, but gradually. First Maria, the immigrant Jack had met in the support group, arrived with her 2 young children, fleeing a husband who had threatened to kill her. Then Jennifer, the lawyer, arrived late at night with only a small bag and a black eye, having finally found the courage to leave her doctor husband. Then Rachel, and then others. Jack found himself in a role he had never imagined. He wasn't a counselor or therapist, but he was a stable presence, a father figure to many of these women who had never had a reliable man in their lives. He helped with practical things, fixing leaky faucets, teaching teenagers how to change a tire, playing chess with children who needed a distraction from their traumatic circumstances. The women were initially wary of him. Many had been hurt so deeply by men that any male presence was a trigger. But Jack was patient. He gave them space when he sensed they needed it. He always asked permission before entering a room. He never raised his voice, never made sudden movements. Gradually, trust was built. There were difficult times, too, nights when ex-partners would show up drunk or high, banging on the door, demanding to see their women. Jack had worked with the local police to establish protocols, and they responded quickly whenever called. There were times when women, overwhelmed by trauma and uncertainty, would go back to their abusers. Every time this happened, it broke Jack's heart, but Emily reminded him that they couldn't force anyone to make the right choices, only provide support when they were ready. One of the residents, a 42-year-old woman named Patricia with 3 teenage children, became particularly close to Jack. She had fled a 20-year marriage to a man who controlled every aspect of her life. She had never driven a car alone. She had never had her own bank account. She had never made a significant choice without her husband's permission. Jack began teaching her to drive in the large, empty parking lot of a nearby school on Sundays. He was patient as she struggled with the controls, encouraging when she was ready to give up. When she finally passed her driving test, she cried tears of joy and hugged him so tightly he couldn't breathe. "You don't understand what this means to me," she said between sobs. "For the first time in my adult life, I can go where I want, when I want. I'm free." These moments made it all worthwhile, seeing women regain their independence, their confidence, their lives. Seeing children who had arrived scared and withdrawn begin to play and smile again, knowing that Casa Sarah was making a real, tangible difference. As the months turned into years, the shelter grew. Emily finished her nursing program and got a job at a local hospital, but continued running Casa Sarah part-time with the help of a growing team of professionals and volunteers. They expanded into the adjacent property, adding more rooms and services. Jack, now 65, was busier and more fulfilled than he had been in decades. He was officially the director of operations at Sarah's home, a title that made him laugh considering his previous experience was mostly driving a truck. But he was good at it. He knew how to keep a building running, how to manage volunteers, how to balance tight budgets, and most importantly, he knew how to make people feel safe. Emily had become like family to him. Lily, now 6, called him Uncle Jack, and ran to him whenever she saw him. She was a bright and curious little girl who had inherited her mother's strength. Derek, her father, was serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison. Lily sometimes asked about him, and Emily, with the help of a child therapist, was navigating how to maintain some kind of connection without exposing her daughter to danger or toxicity. Jack, Emily, and Lily often had dinner together, sometimes at Jack's apartment, sometimes at Emily's small apartment. They weren't a family in the traditional sense, but they were something equally precious. They were people who cared deeply for one another, united not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual respect. One October evening, 3 years after that fateful night on Interstate 40, they sat together in the front yard of Sarah's house. Lily was playing on the swing Jack had installed, her laughter filling the air. Emily and Jack sat on a nearby bench watching her play. "Have you ever thought about what would have happened if you had simply driven by that night?" Emily asked softly. Jack was silent for a moment. "I think about it sometimes. You'd probably be dead. Lily would be motherless. And I'd still be driving empty roads, returning to an empty house, wondering why I'm still here when Sarah isn't." "Destiny," Emily said. "It has to be. Of all the people who could have passed by on that road at that exact moment, it was you, a man who had served his country, a man who had training to deal with violent situations, a man who had lost the love of his life and was looking for a reason to go on. You were the one who stopped Jack, and that changed everything." "It wasn't fate," Jack said after thinking. "It was choice. My choice to stop. Your choice to fight. Our choice is to transform that horror into something good. Fate may have placed us in the same place, but it was our choices that determined what happened next." Emily smiled. "Perhaps you're right, and I'm very grateful that you made the choice you did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily play as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack thought about Sarah, about how she would have loved this, would have loved Emily and Lily, would have been proud of the work he was doing. The pain of losing her would never completely disappear, he knew that. But it had transformed into something more bearable, something that coexisted with joy and purpose instead of consuming him completely. It was around this time that Jack began receiving calls from other truck drivers. His story had spread through the trucking community, shared at rest stops and via CB radio. Drivers called seeking advice about suspicious situations they had witnessed on the road. Some wanted to donate to Sarah's home. Others wanted to know how they could start similar projects in their own communities. Jack realized there was an opportunity here. Truck drivers were constantly on the roads, seeing things that other people didn't. They could be eyes and ears. They could intervene when they witnessed dangerous situations. They could make a difference. He began working with national trucking organizations to develop training programs, how to recognize signs of human trafficking, how to safely respond to domestic violence situations, how to properly report suspicious activity. The program, which they called Safe Highways, took off faster than anyone expected. Dozens of trucking companies signed on, agreeing to train their drivers. Stories began to emerge of other drivers who had intervened in dangerous situations, rescued victims of human trafficking, and helped people in distress. Jack found himself traveling again, not as a driver but as a speaker, sharing his story and encouraging others to be vigilant, to care, to take action. Emily had also become a powerful advocate. She spoke regularly at conferences on domestic violence, shared her story with lawmakers pushing for stronger laws, and appeared on news programs discussing the warning signs of abusive relationships. The face that had once been bruised and terrified now shone with confidence and purpose. But for all the success and growth, the most significant moments were still the smaller ones. A woman getting her first job after years of being forced to stay at home. A child laughing freely for the first time in months. a mother getting her own apartment, bringing her children into a truly safe home. Jack kept a notebook where he recorded these victories. He had started it as a way to remind himself why work mattered on difficult days. Now he had dozens of entries, each telling the story of a life transformed. He would read through them sometimes when he felt tired or overwhelmed, and they would refill him with determination. On one of those difficult nights, about 4 years after the shelter opened, Jack was sitting in his apartment, leafing through his notebook when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, with an area code from a different state. "Hello? Mr. Morrison? Jack Morrison?" The voice was feminine, hesitant. "Yes, it's me. My name is Angela Davis. You don't know me, but I'm calling because I heard about what you did with Sarah's home, and I needed to thank you." "Thank you for what?" Jack was confused. 6 months ago, my brother was driving his truck in Texas when he saw something strange. A young woman was being forced into a van by 2 men. He had just completed the safe highways training that his program offers. So instead of simply continuing to drive, he called 911, followed the van at a safe distance, and kept dispatchers updated on its location. Jack straightened up, his attention now fully focused. "The police managed to intercept the van," Angela continued, her voice becoming emotional. "They found not only that woman, but 3 others as well. All of them had been kidnapped for a sex trafficking ring. Because of my brother's actions, because of the training he received from his program, 4 women were saved. One of them was my niece, my 16-year-old niece who had disappeared 2 weeks earlier. We thought we would never see her again." Jack felt his throat tighten. "My God." So thank you," Angela said, now crying. "Thank you for not just driving off that night. Thank you for turning your experience into something that saves other people. Because of you, I have my niece back. She's home. She's safe. She's getting help. And it's all because of you." After he hung up, Jack sat in silence for a long time, letting the tears flow freely down his face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something more complex. Admiration, perhaps. Gratitude. The humble understanding that a single action, a single choice to stop when he could have continued, had triggered ripples that extended far beyond what he could have imagined. He took Sarah's photo from his wallet, the one he always carried with him, and looked at her beloved face. "I hope you're proud," he whispered to the image. "I hope this means something." But he already knew the answer. Sarah would be proud, not only of what he had built, but of who he had become. A man who had transformed loss into purpose, pain into compassion, grief into action. A man who had chosen to stop. As the years passed, Casa Sara continued to grow and evolve. They opened a 2nd location in Santa Fe, then a 3rd in Las Cruces. Each followed the model that had worked so well. Not just temporary shelter, but comprehensive support to help women rebuild their lives completely. Emily hired a dedicated team of counselors, lawyers, case coordinators, and educators. They developed partnerships with local employers to provide vocational training and employment opportunities. The Safe Highways program expanded nationally, with thousands of truck drivers trained to recognize and respond to dangerous situations. Stories regularly arrived of drivers who had intervened, saved victims, and made a difference. Jack corresponded with many of them, offering encouragement and advice. Lily grew into a bright and compassionate little girl who talked about wanting to be a counselor when she grew up, to help people like Mommy helps people. She had thrived in the stable and loving environment Emily had created, with no real memories of her father or the terror of those early years. She knew Jack as Uncle Jack, the man who was always there, who taught her to ride a bike, who helped her with math homework, who made her laugh with his road stories. Jack, too, had made peace with his own mortality. He was now in his late 60s, with completely white hair and more wrinkles, but still strong, still active. He knew he didn't have decades left, but the years he had were rich and full of meaning. He was no longer just existing, he was living. One spring afternoon, Jack was in his office at Sarah's house when Patricia, the woman he had taught to drive years before, knocked on the door. She was now part of the permanent staff, working as a peer advocate, using her experience to help other survivors. "Jack, there's someone here to see you," she said with a mysterious smile. "Who is it?" "It's a surprise. Come." Intrigued, Jack followed her into the main hallway. A woman was there, about 30 years old, with a little girl clinging to her hand. The woman seemed vaguely familiar, but Jack couldn't place where he knew her from. "Mr. Morrison?" the woman said, approaching. "I don't know if you remember me. My name is Jennifer Chavez. You met me here about 4 years ago. I was the lawyer trying to escape my doctor husband." Recognition became clear. "Jennifer, of course I remember. How are you?" "I'm amazing," she said, and her smile proved it. "I finalized my divorce, got a permanent restraining order, rebuilt my career, and this," she pointed to the little girl, "is Sophia. She's 3 years old now. I was pregnant when I got here, but I was so traumatized that I wasn't sure if I could keep the baby. You all here helped me understand that I could be a good mother, that I could provide a safe and loving home. Sophia saved my life in so many ways, but you gave me the tools to be the mother she deserves." Jack felt that familiar lump in his throat. "I'm so glad to hear that." "But that's not the only reason I came," Jennifer continued. "I just accepted a position as director of a non-profit legal services organization, and one of my first priorities is to establish a legal clinic specifically for survivors of domestic violence, providing free representation for restraining orders, divorces, child custody. I want to partner with Casa Sarah, work directly with its residents, and I want to do this as a way of giving back for everything you've done for me." Jack had to sit down. That was what he loved about their work. It wasn't just about saving people, but about empowering them to go back and help others, creating a cycle of healing and support that was self-sustaining and growing. "That would be amazing," he managed to say. "Emily will want to hear about it. Let's schedule a meeting." After Jennifer left, Patricia turned to Jack with tears in her eyes. "Do you see what you started? Do you see how many lives you touched?" Jack shook his head. "It wasn't just me. It was Emily, it was you, it was all the volunteers and donors and supporters. It was the women themselves who did the hard work of healing and rebuilding." "But it started with you," Patricia insisted. "It started with a man who stopped when he could have kept driving. A man who saw someone in danger and chose to act. And now look, hundreds of women saved, thousands of lives touched, an entire movement of truck drivers trained to make a difference. All because you stopped." That night, Jack drove to a familiar spot, Interstate 40, about 20 miles west of Albuquerque, the exact spot where he had stopped on that fateful night 5 years earlier. He pulled his car over to the side of the road, in the same place where his truck had been, and got out. The road looked different now, though nothing had really changed. Same asphalt, same desolate landscape stretching to the distant mountains, same vast sky transforming through the rainbows of the sunset. But for Jack, everything was different. This stretch of road had somehow become sacred, the place where everything changed. He thought of all the people whose lives had been touched. Emily, who transformed her trauma into advocacy and leadership. Lily, growing up safe and loved. The hundreds of women who had passed through Casa Sarah, each with her own story of survival and rebirth. The truck drivers who now watched the roads, ready to intervene. Angela's niece, saved from human trafficking. Jennifer and her baby, Patricia and her children. So many waves stretching out from the epicenter of that single moment. And Sarah. Always Sarah. He had spent so much time after her death feeling powerless, useless, unable to save the only person who mattered. But now he understood something that had taken him years to learn. He couldn't have saved Sarah. It wasn't in his power, no matter how much he wanted to, no matter how hard he tried. But by letting her go, by transforming his grief into something bigger than himself, he had honored her memory in a way she would have deeply appreciated. Sarah had always cared about others. She had always found ways to help, to make a difference, to make the world a little better, and now Jack was doing the same, not despite losing her, but because of her. She had taught him about love, about compassion, about the importance of caring. These lessons didn't die with her. They lived on through him, through the work he did, through the lives he touched. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Jack stood there a moment longer, letting the peace of the desert wash over him. Then he returned to his car and drove back to Albuquerque, back to Casasara, back to the work that awaited him. Because there was still work to be done. There were still women who needed help, children who needed safety, drivers who needed training, funds that needed to be raised, systems that needed to be changed. The work never really ended, but it was the kind of work that made life worth living. Jack Morrison had been many things in his life: a Marine, a husband, a truck driver. But in the years since that night on Interstate 40, he had become something more. A defender, a protector, a force for good in a world that too often seemed dominated by darkness. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, had bad days, sometimes felt the weight of it all very heavily. But he showed up every day, doing the work, making a difference. And that, he finally understood, was what heroism truly was. Not a single dramatic act, although that mattered too. But the consistent choice, day after day, to show up, to care, to act when action is needed. And it all started with a simple choice: the choice to stop. Years later, when Jack was well into his 70s, he was invited to speak at a national conference on domestic violence. He was nervous, as he always was before speaking, but Emily, who was now nationally recognized as an expert and advocate, encouraged him. She would be there with him, as she always had been. The conference room was packed with hundreds of social workers, shelter staff, police officers, counselors, survivors, and advocates. Jack stepped onto the stage, his legs a little stiffer than usual, his hair completely white now. He looked at the crowd of faces staring at him expectantly. "I'm not a lecturer," he began, his voice hoarse but firm. "I'm not a therapist or a social worker or an academic. I'm just an old man who used to drive a truck, but 7 years ago, I drove through a situation that changed my life, and I hope my story can help you in your work." He then told the story, not for the first time, but this time with the perspective of years, with the understanding of how that moment had spread to touch so many lives. He spoke about seeing Emily being dragged away, about the choice to stop, about the confrontation, about everything that came after. He spoke about building Sarah's home, about the Safe Highways program, about the hundreds of women who had found safety and help. "But here's what I want you to understand," he said, leaning forward and making eye contact with the people in the audience. "I didn't do anything special. I don't have superpowers. I'm not an action movie hero. I'm just a man who saw someone else in danger and decided I couldn't just drive past. And that's the message I want to leave you with today." He paused, letting his words sink in. Each one of you in this room has the power to make a difference. Each one of you, every day, makes choices about whether to act or look the other way, whether to help or keep walking. And those choices matter. They matter more than you can imagine. One action, one choice to stop and help can change the course of a life. It can save a life, and the ripples of that action can extend far beyond what you will ever know. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. So my challenge to you is this. Stop. When you see something wrong, when you see someone in danger, when your instinct tells you that something is not right, stop. Not literally, not necessarily putting yourself in danger, but stop and do something. Call the authorities, offer help, be a witness, intervene safely if you can, because you never know, that moment, that choice, could be the turning point that saves a life. He finished his speech to thunderous applause. People stood up, a standing ovation that continued for minutes. Jack, always uncomfortable with attention, awkwardly waved and quickly left the stage, but later, during the networking portion of the conference, he was approached by dozens of people wanting to shake his hand, share their own stories, thank him for his work. A young woman, no more than 25, approached with tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Morrison, I just wanted you to know, I was one of the children. I was at Sarah's home with my mother when I was 8 years old. We stayed for 6 months while my mother recovered, and that place saved our lives. I remember you. You taught me how to ride a bike in the parking lot. You helped me with my math homework. You made me feel safe for the first time I could remember." Jack barely remembered her specifically. There had been so many children over the years, but he was touched by her testimony. "Where are you now?" he asked gently. "I'm majoring in social work," she said, smiling through her tears. "Because of what I saw at Sarah's home, because of people like you and Emily, I want to do what you do. I want to help other children like me." And there it was again, the waves stretching out, touching lives in ways he could never have predicted. This girl, who had arrived at Sarah's house frightened and traumatized, now dedicating her life to helping others, the cycle continuing, growing, perpetuating itself. As Jack aged into his 70s, he slowly began to reduce his active work at Sarah's house, not because he no longer cared, but because his body simply didn't cooperate as it used to. His back ached after long hours on his feet. His knees complained when he climbed stairs. He needed afternoon naps in a way he never had before. But he still came every day, even if it was just to sit in the garden and talk with the residents, to offer a word of encouragement, simply to be present. His presence alone meant something, the women told him, knowing that there was a man who truly cared, who wanted nothing more from them than to see them succeed, who had proven through years of consistent action that they were worthy of protection and support. Emily, now in her 30s, had become the face of the anti-domestic violence movement in New Mexico and beyond. She regularly testified before state and federal legislatures. She appeared on national news programs. She had written a book about her experience that became a bestseller and had helped countless other survivors understand that they were not alone. And through it all, she credited Jack, telling anyone who would listen that she wouldn't be alive without him, much less doing the work she did. Jack always deflected such praise. "You did the work," he'd say. "I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. But you're the one who turned that moment into a movement." Lily, now a teenager, volunteered at Sarah's house on weekends. She was kind and compassionate, with a natural talent for making others feel comfortable. Jack watched her work, seeing so much of Emily in her, but also qualities of his own, unique and valuable. She often talked about working in human rights when she grew up, about fighting injustice and protecting the vulnerable. "Do you think it's genetic?" she asked Jack once. "Like, do you think I was born wanting to help people? Or is it because of how my mother raised me?" Jack considered the question. "I think it's probably a bit of both. But honestly, I think it has more to do with what you've experienced and witnessed. You grew up watching your mother transform trauma into strength. You grew up surrounded by people who care, who act, who make a difference. That shaped who you are." "Well, I'm glad it shaped me," Lily said. "I can't imagine wanting to be anything other than someone who helps." It was a quiet winter afternoon. Jack was sitting in his apartment reading when he felt a sudden pain in his chest. It wasn't severe, just an uncomfortable tightness, but it was worrying enough that he called Emily. She insisted on taking him to the hospital immediately. Tests showed he'd had a minor heart attack. Nothing catastrophic, but a clear warning that his body was slowing down. Doctors prescribed medication, recommended lifestyle changes, and warned him he needed to reduce stress. Emily was devastated, sitting beside her hospital bed, her eyes red from crying. "You can't leave me," she said firmly. "Not now, not after everything." Jack took her hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. "I'm not going anywhere yet. But Emily, you need to understand something. When my time comes, and it will eventually come for all of us, I will be at peace. Because these last few years, these years since that night on the road, have been the most meaningful of my life. I made a difference. I helped people. I mattered. There is no greater gift than that." "You mattered more than you know," Emily insisted. "You saved my life. You gave me a second chance. You helped me build something that will continue to help people for generations. You're the father I never had, the grandfather Lily loves, your family." Jack felt tears welling up in his eyes. Family. He had lost Sarah, and he thought he had lost the ability to have a family again. But he was wrong. Family wasn't just blood. It was choice. It was love. It was showing up day after day, caring, being present. "You're my family too," he said softly. "You and Lily. You gave me a reason to keep going when I wasn't sure if it was worth it. You reminded me that there were still good things in the world, still purpose to be found." He recovered from the heart attack, but it marked a turning point. Jack had to accept his limitations, reduce his workload, and focus more on taking care of himself. It was difficult for someone who had spent the last few years dedicated to helping others, but he found new ways to contribute. He began writing, documenting the history of Sarah's home, the lessons learned, and advice for others wanting to start similar programs. He mentored young people who wanted to enter social work, sharing decades of life wisdom, and he spent more time with Lily, who was now in high school and full of questions about life, love, justice, and meaning. He enjoyed those conversations, the way her mind worked, how she challenged assumptions and thought deeply about complex issues. "Uncle Jack," she asked one afternoon as they sat in her apartment, she doing homework while he read, "have you ever regretted stopping that night? How everything changed your life? You had to quit your job, sell your house, start completely over. Have you ever wished you had just kept driving?" Jack put his book aside, giving it his full attention. It was a good question, one he had asked himself occasionally over the years. "No," he finally said, "not once. Because before that night I was just existing, going through the motions, passing the time, waiting, I don't know what. Waiting to die, maybe, to be with Sarah again. But after that night, after meeting her mother and seeing what we could build together, I was living again. Really living, doing things that mattered, having relationships that mattered, being part of something bigger than myself. How could I regret that?" Lily smiled. "I'm glad you stopped. Because if you hadn't, I wouldn't have a mother, and I wouldn't have you. And you're like my favorite grandfather, even though we're not related by blood." "You're like my favorite granddaughter," Jack retorted, laughing, "even though you're my only granddaughter." She threw a pillow at him, and they both laughed, the kind of easy, comfortable laughter that only comes from genuine love and deep familiarity. As the years went by, Casa Sarah continued to grow. They now had 6 locations throughout New Mexico, serving hundreds of women and children annually. The Safe Highways program had expanded internationally, with drivers in Canada, Mexico, and Europe receiving training. Jack and Emily's story had been featured in documentaries, books, and countless news articles. But for Jack, the true measures of success weren't in headlines or awards. They were in the quiet moments. A woman smiling for the first time in months, a child laughing freely, a mother getting the keys to her own safe apartment. They were in former residents returning as volunteers, wanting to give back as Jennifer had done. They were in the letters arriving from survivors across the country, sharing their stories, expressing gratitude, offering hope to others. Jack kept all these letters in boxes in his apartment. There were hundreds of them now, maybe thousands. He read them sometimes, especially on difficult days when arthritis kept him indoors or when loneliness struck. Each letter was a reminder of why the work mattered, of how many lives had been touched, of how much good had come from that single moment of choosing to stop. It was on a sunny June day, Jack, now 75 years old, that something remarkable happened. He was on his usual bench in the front garden of Sarah's house, watching new residents arrive, when a sleek black car pulled up in front. A man in a suit got out, looking a little lost as he glanced around. Jack was about to offer help when the man saw him and his face lit up. He walked quickly to the bench. "Sorry to bother you," the man said. "I'm looking for Jack Morrison. I was told I could find him here." "You found him," said Jack. "How can I help?" The man extended his hand. "My name is Marcus Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the National Humanitarian Foundation. I don't know if you've heard of us, but we're one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country, focused on human rights and social justice." Jack shook his hand, intrigued. "Nice to meet you, Marcus. What brings you to Sarah's house?" Marcus sat on the bench next to him, carefully adjusting his suit. "Mr. Morrison, Jack, if I may, I've been following your work for years. The story of how you saved Emily Patterson, how you two together built Sarah's home, how that expanded into the Safe Highways program, is simply extraordinary. It's the kind of foundation for transformational impact that our foundation seeks to support and amplify." "I appreciate that," Jack said cautiously, not sure where this was going. "But I'm not just here to offer my congratulations," Marcus continued. "I'm here to tell you that our foundation wants to make a larger donation to Sarah's home, $5 million, specifically designated to expand its services, open more locations, and develop training materials that can be used by other organizations nationally." Jack was speechless. $5 million. It was more money than he could have imagined, more than they had raised in all those years combined. "But there's more," Marcus said, smiling at Jack's shocked expression. "Every year our foundation presents the National Humanitarian Award to individuals who have made extraordinary contributions to society. This year, the board voted unanimously to present this award to you, Mr. Morrison, in recognition of your courage, compassion, and tireless dedication to protecting the vulnerable." I don't know what to say," Jack managed. "But Emily should receive this award, not me. She's the one who built all this, who manages it, who is the face of the movement." Emily Patterson will be honored as well," Marcus assured. "But this award is specifically for you, Jack, because it all started with your choice to stop, your choice to act when it was easier to look the other way. That's what makes your story so powerful. You weren't a social worker or a police officer or a trained professional. You were just an ordinary man who made an extraordinary choice. And that choice had ripples that touched tens of thousands of lives." The award ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., a few months later. It was an elegant event in a sophisticated hotel with hundreds of attendees, including legislators, philanthropists, leaders of non-profit organizations, and media. Jack was uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, the knot of his tie choking him, but Emily was by his side, stunning in a blue evening gown, holding his hand and whispering words of encouragement. Lily was there too, now almost 17. Beautiful and grown up in the first formal dress she had ever worn. She kept taking pictures with her phone, laughing at how nervous Jack was. When it was time for Jack to go up on stage to receive the award and give a speech, his legs trembled as he walked to the podium. The weight of hundreds of eyes on him was overwhelming. But then he saw Emily and Lily in the front row, both smiling encouragingly, and he took a deep breath. "I don't feel comfortable being called a hero," he began, his voice amplified through the sound system. "I didn't do anything that any decent person wouldn't do. I saw someone in danger and I stopped to help. That shouldn't be extraordinary. It should be ordinary. It should be what we all do when we witness injustice or violence or suffering." He paused, gathering his thoughts. But we live in a world where it's often easier to look the other way, where it's more convenient to assume that someone else will intervene, that it's not our responsibility, that we can't make a difference anyway. And that's the problem, because when everyone thinks that way, nobody acts, and people suffer and die, and cycles of violence continue. Her voice was stronger now, more passionate. "So here's what I want to say to all of you today. You can make a difference. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be saving someone from a kidnapper on the road. It can simply be noticing when your neighbor is hurt and offering help. It can be believing a friend when she tells you that her partner is abusive. It can be donating to a local shelter. It can be volunteering a few hours a month. It can simply be educating yourself about the signs of domestic violence so that you can recognize it and respond appropriately." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could. Small actions add up, small choices matter, and when enough of us make those small choices to act instead of ignoring, to help instead of looking the other way, to care instead of turning away, we change the world. One act of courage at a time, one life saved at a time, one choice to stop at a time. The applause when it ended was deafening. People stood up, clapping and waving. Jack, overwhelmed, just waved awkwardly and left the stage as quickly as he could, but the message had resonated. In the days and weeks that followed, Sarah's home was flooded with donations from all over the country. Hundreds of volunteers stepped forward. The video of his speech went viral online, viewed millions of times. Emily teased him about it. "You're an internet celebrity now, Jack. You've got fans." He rolled his eyes. "I don't want fans. I just want people to help." "And they are helping," she assured him. "Thanks to you." Jack's final years were peaceful in a way he couldn't have imagined possible after Sarah died. He was surrounded by love, purpose, and fulfillment. He had made peace with his mortality, understanding that when his time came, he had lived well, had mattered, and had left the world a little better than he had found it. He still thought about Sarah every day. He still wore his wedding ring. He still talked to her sometimes, sharing what was happening in his life, telling her about Emily and Lily, describing the work that Sarah's house was doing. He didn't know if she could hear him from wherever she was, but it brought her comfort nonetheless. It was on a quiet autumn night, Jack, now 78 years old, that he had another heart attack. This one was more severe than the first. Emily found him collapsed in his apartment and immediately called an ambulance. They rushed to the hospital, doctors working frantically to stabilize him. He survived, but barely. The doctors were honest. His heart was failing. They could keep him comfortable, but there wasn't much more they could do. It was a matter of months, maybe weeks. Emily was devastated. Lily, now a 20-year-old college student studying social work as she had promised, flew back home immediately. They spent every available moment in the hospital with Jack, holding his hand, sharing memories, telling him how much he meant to them. Jack, despite the pain and weakness, was at peace. He was not afraid. He had lived a good, rich, meaningful life. He had loved and been loved. He had made a difference. What more could anyone ask for? "Don't be sad," he told Emily and Lily one day, his voice weak but firm. "I've lived more fully in these last 10 years than many people live in their entire lives. Because of you, Because of the work we did together, I have no regrets. But we're going to miss you, Lily said, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how I'm going to do this without you. You know, Jack assured her, you have your mother's heart, her strength, her compassion, and you had me as an example, but more importantly, you have yourself. You're amazing, Lily. You're going to do wonderful things. You've already started. He looked at Emily, who was holding his other hand, crying silently. And you, he said softly, you turned the worst moment of your life into purpose. You saved so many people. You built something that will last far beyond any of us. Sarah would have loved you. She would have been so proud of who you became. I wouldn't have become anything without you, Emily said, her voice breaking. You saved me, in so many ways, not just that night. You showed me that there was goodness in the world, that there were men who could be trusted, who could care without wanting anything in return. You were the father I never had. And you were the daughter Sarah and I never got to have, Jack said. You and Lily, you were my family, when I thought I'd never have one again. There's no greater gift than that. They sat in silence for a moment, just being together, holding each other as time slowly slipped away. Promise me something, Jack finally said. Promise me you'll continue the work. That Casa Sarah will continue, will grow, will help more people. Promise me you'll continue training truck drivers, continue being voices for those who can't speak for themselves. Promise me you won't let this end. We promise, Emily said firmly. House Sarah will continue. Her legacy will continue. We'll make sure of it. And I'm going to keep stopping, Lily said. When I see something wrong, when I see someone in danger, I'm going to stop, like you taught me, like you showed us all. Jack smiled, a weak but genuine smile. Then I'm not afraid, because I know the work will continue, lives will continue to be saved, the world will continue to improve, one act of courage at a time. He passed away 3 days later, with Emily and Lily by his side. He went peacefully without pain, simply slipping from sleep into something else. His last words were to Emily, "Tell her I'm coming home." She knew he was talking about Sarah. Finally, after so many years, they would be together again. The funeral was huge. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Former residents of Sarah's home, some with children Jack had known as babies, now grown up. Truck drivers who had been trained through the Safe Highways program. Social workers, police officers, shelter workers, advocates, politicians and philanthropists, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by Jack's work in some way. Emily delivered the eulogy. She stood before the assembled crowd, composed and strong despite her broken heart, and told Jack's story. Not just the facts, but the man behind them. His kindness, his humility, his quiet humor, his unwavering strength. His devotion to Sarah even years after her death. His love for Lily as if she were his own granddaughter. His tireless dedication to helping those most in need. Jack Morrison was just a man, she said, her voice echoing through the chapel. Just a man who made the simple choice to stop when it was easier to keep driving. But that choice changed everything. It changed my life. It changed my daughter's life. And through the work we built together, it changed the lives of thousands of other women and children and families. She paused, looking around at the assembled faces, seeing the impact Jack had made reflected in each one. Jack didn't want to be called a hero. He said he only did what any decent person would do, and maybe he's right. Maybe he was just being decent. But if that's the case, then we need more decent people in the world. We need more people who stop, more people who act, more people who choose to make a difference when it's easier to look the other way. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. So the best way to honor Jack's memory is not just to remember him, although we will do that. It's not just to be sad about his loss, although we are. The best way to honor him is to continue his work. It's to stop when we see something wrong. It's to help when someone needs it. It's to choose courage over convenience, compassion over indifference, action over apathy. She looked directly at Lily, who was sitting in the front row, tears silently streaming down her face. Jack once told me that a single action can change the course of a life. He was right. His action changed mine. But what he may not have fully realized is that through that action, through the work we built together, we changed the course of thousands of lives. And those ripples will continue to extend far beyond any one of us. She took a deep breath, struggling to maintain her composure. Jack, wherever you are, I hope you know how much you were loved. I hope you know how much you mattered. I hope you are with Sarah now, finally at peace. And I hope you know that your legacy will continue. Sarah's home will continue. The Safe Highways program will continue. And most importantly, the lessons you taught us about courage, about compassion, about the importance of stopping, those lessons will continue to be passed down from one person to another, from one generation to the next. She finished, her voice finally breaking. Rest in peace, Jack Morrison. You were just an ordinary man who made extraordinary choices, and because of that, the world is a better place. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being you. The months following Jack's death were difficult for Emily and Lily. The house seemed quieter without him. Sarah's house seemed empty without his constant presence. But they remembered their promise to him, and they continued the work. Indeed, energized by the loss and determined to honor his memory, they expanded. They opened 3 new Sarah home locations that year, in cities where the need was great, but resources were scarce. They secured funding for a national training program that would bring the principles of safe highways to every state. They established the Jack Morrison Memorial Foundation, dedicated to supporting innovative domestic violence prevention projects. Lily, now graduating with a degree in social work, chose to write her honors thesis on the impact of witness intervention in domestic violence situations. She interviewed hundreds of survivors, truck drivers, and professionals. Her research showed what she already knew in her heart, that when ordinary people choose to act, they save lives. The thesis won awards and was published in a prestigious academic journal. Years passed. 5 years, 10 years, then 20 years since Jack stopped at that Interstate 40. Emily was now in her 40s, her hair beginning to show grey strands, but still as vibrant and dedicated as ever. Lily was in her 30s, a respected social worker who ran her own non-profit focused on preventing youth violence. Sarah's house had grown beyond anything Jack could have imagined. There were now 23 locations in 7 states. Thousands of women and children had passed through its doors, each receiving not only temporary shelter but comprehensive support to rebuild their lives. The success rate was remarkable. Over 80% of the women who completed the program never returned to abusive relationships. The Safe Highways program was now in 45 countries. Hundreds of thousands of drivers had been trained. Stories regularly arrived of drivers who had intervened, saved victims, made a difference. Emily kept each story in a special file, knowing that Jack would have loved to read each one. It was on a spring morning, exactly 25 years after that fateful night, that Emily and Lily drove to that stretch of Interstate 40. They had coordinated with local authorities to install a historical marker at the exact spot where Jack had stopped. There was a small ceremony. Local officials were present, some reporters, a small group of former residents of Sarah's home who wanted to be there. The marker was simple but powerful. A bronze plaque mounted on natural stone with the following inscription: "At this spot, on October 15, 2025, Jack Morrison stopped to help a stranger in distress." That single act of courage saved a life and inspired a movement. May this plaque serve as a reminder that each of us has the power to make a difference when we choose to stop, when we choose to act, when we choose to care. Below was a quote from Jack's own words. It wasn't fate, it was choice. Emily and Lily unveiled the plaque together, pulling back the ceremonial cloth that covered it. There was applause from the assembled crowd, photos were taken, and brief speeches were given. But the moment that mattered, the moment that truly meant something, was after everyone had left, and Emily and Lily were left alone beside the plaque. "Do you think he would have liked this?" Lily asked, looking at the marker. "He would have been embarrassed by the attention," Emily said with a sad smile. "But I think he would have understood why it's important. It's not about glorifying him. It's about reminding people of what's possible, of what each of us can do when we choose to care." They stood there in silence for a moment, watching the cars speed by on the road. So many cars, so many drivers, each on their own journey. How many of them were heading towards life-changing moments? How many would witness something that would require a choice between acting or looking the other way? "You know what's funny?" Lily finally said. 25 years ago, this saved your life. And in saving your life, Jack found a purpose that saved his too, and together you saved thousands of others. It's like throwing stones into a lake, the rings spreading further and further." "That's exactly it," Emily agreed. "And the rings are still spreading. Every woman who goes through Casa Sara tells her story, touching other lives. Every driver trained by the Safe Highways program becomes another person who can make a difference. Every act of courage inspires another." She turned to her daughter, seeing so much of herself in Lily, but also so much of Jack. That quiet strength, that unwavering compassion, that dedication to protecting the vulnerable. "Uncle Jack once told me that small choices matter," Emily said. "That when enough of us make those small choices to act instead of ignoring, to help instead of looking the other way, we change the world, one act of courage at a time." "He was right," Lily said. "And I'm going to keep making those choices. Every time. Always." They went back to the car, but Emily stopped and looked back one more time. She could almost see it in her mind, the black SUV, Derek dragging her, her own terror and despair. And then the truck stopping, that normal-looking man getting out, choosing to intervene when it would have been safer to do nothing. That moment had defined the course of his life, but more than that, it had defined the course of so many other lives as well. Jack was right. It wasn't destiny. It was choice. And every choice mattered. Every action had consequences, ripples that spread in ways we couldn't predict or control. The lesson then was simple yet profound. Choose kindness. Choose courage. Choose to act. And when you see someone in danger, when you witness injustice, when your instinct tells you something is wrong, choose to stop, because you never know. That moment, that choice, could be the turning point that saves a life, and by saving a life, you can change the world. Emily got into the car, where Lily was already waiting. They drove back to town, back to Sarah's house, back to the work that never really ended. But it was the kind of work that made life worth living. It was the kind of work Jack had dedicated his last years to. It was the kind of work they would continue doing in his memory. And somewhere, perhaps, Jack Morrison was with Sarah again, finally at peace, finally home. And perhaps he was looking down, seeing the legacy he had left, the lives that continued to be saved, the rings still spreading from that single act of choosing to stop. Perhaps he finally understood what Emily had tried to say so many times. He wasn't just an old truck driver who was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. He was a hero, not because he did something impossible or superhuman, but because he did something simple and profoundly human. He chose to care. He chose to act. He chose to stop, and that choice changed everything.